Marcus Chen's hands trembled as he stared at the notification on his phone. The transaction amount made his breath catch. $3,000. One single purchase. His jaw clenched as he scrolled through the list of charges that had appeared over the last 23 hours. Each one felt like a betrayal, a confirmation of everything he'd always believed about human nature. Why would she buy this? He whispered to himself, his voice barely audible in the silence of his penthouse office. His finger hovered over the button that would freeze the card, and this experiment, prove once and for all that he'd been right. That people, when given everything, would take everything. That poverty didn't make saints. That desperation revealed the worst in humanity, not the best. But something stopped him. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was hope, though he'd never admit that. He set the phone down and closed his eyes, letting his mind drift back to where this had all begun. 24 hours earlier. Marcus Chin hadn't become a billionaire by trusting people. At 42, he'd built an empire on algorithms, data, and the cold certainty that human behavior was predictable. People were motivated by self-interest. They lied. They cheated. They took shortcuts. His wealth management software had made him rich precisely because it assumed the worst about people and protected assets accordingly. He walked through the streets of downtown Seattle that morning with the same detachment he brought to everything. Board meeting in an hour. Merger discussion after lunch. Dinner with investors who'd smile and pretend they cared about anything other than returns. His life was a series of calculated moves, each one designed to increase his wealth, his influence, his control. The rain had stopped, leaving the sidewalk slick and reflecting the gray sky above. Marcus barely noticed. He was reviewing quarterly projections on his phone when he heard the commotion ahead. I said no. You can't just sit here all day. You're driving away customers. A store manager stood in the doorway of a pharmacy, his face red with frustration. In front of him, a woman gathered her belongings with shaking hands. She was young, probably early 30s, with dark circles under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and endless worry. Her clothes were clean but worn, layered against the cold. Next to her, a small girl, maybe 6 years old, clutched a stuffed rabbit that had seen better days. Please, the woman said, her voice steady despite the obvious humiliation. I just need to buy medicine. My daughter has a fever. I have enough for the medication, I promise. We'll leave right after. You've been sitting on that bench for an hour. I don't care what you need. Move along, or I'm calling the police. Marcus slowed his pace, watching. The woman's shoulders sagged, but she didn't argue further. She picked up a worn backpack, took her daughter's hand, and turned to leave. That's when the little girl stumbled, her legs weak. The mother caught her, supporting her weight with visible effort. Mama, I'm cold, the child whispered. I know, baby. I know. Marcus should have kept walking. He had a meeting. He had a schedule. Other people's problems weren't his concern. He'd built his fortune by focusing on what mattered, by eliminating emotional noise from his decision-making process. Compassion was expensive. Sentiment was a liability. But something made him stop. Maybe it was the way the mother held her daughter, as if she were the most precious thing in the world. Maybe it was the quiet dignity in her voice, even as she was being humiliated. Maybe it was the challenge he saw in this moment, a way to test the theory he'd held his entire adult life. Money reveals character. Give someone everything and you'll see who they really are. Before he could second-guess himself, Marcus stepped forward. Excuse me. The woman turned, her eyes wary. Years of living on the streets had taught her that strangers rarely brought good news. I couldn't help but overhear, Marcus continued. You need medicine for your daughter? The woman's grip tightened on her child's hand. We're fine. We're leaving. I'm not with the store, Marcus said quickly. He reached into his wallet and pulled out a black credit card. American Express Centurion. No preset spending limit. He held it out to her. Take this. Buy what you need. The woman stared at the card as if it were a snake. I don't understand. It's simple. You need help. I'm offering it. Marcus surprised himself with his next words. Actually, I'm offering more than that. Keep the card for 24 hours. Buy whatever you need. No limits. No conditions. This is a joke, the woman said, taking a step back. It's not. Marcus pulled out his phone and showed her the banking app. See? That card is linked to this account. I'll be able to track every purchase, but I won't stop you from using it. 24 hours. Starting now. The little girl coughed, a wet, rattling sound that made her mother's face tighten with worry. Why would you do this? The woman asked. Marcus considered lying, giving her some altruistic reason that would make him sound noble. But he'd built his life on truth, cold as it was. Because I want to see what you'll do with it. I want to know what someone in your position does when they have access to everything. The woman's eyes narrowed. So this is a test? You want to prove that poor people are greedy. I want to prove that people are predictable, Marcus said. What they do with money reveals who they are. I'm giving you a chance to prove me wrong. Or right. For a long moment, the woman just looked at him. Then she looked down at her daughter, who was leaning heavily against her leg, her small face flushed with fever. 24 hours, Marcus repeated, holding out the card. After that, give it back to me. We'll meet tomorrow at the same spot noon. If you don't show up, I'll cancel the card and report it stolen. If you do show up, there are no consequences. No police. No judgment. Just a conversation about what you bought and why. The woman reached out slowly, her fingers hovering over the card. What's your name? Marcus Chin. I'm Sarah. Sarah Mitchell. And this is Emma. She took the card. Marcus watched them walk into the pharmacy, his heart beating faster than it had in years. He pulled out his phone and set up notifications for every transaction. Then he walked away, heading to his meeting, already wondering if he'd just made the stupidest decision of his life. If you're enjoying this story so far, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. This is a journey you won't want to miss, and trust me, what happens next will absolutely shock you. Sarah stood in the pharmacy aisle, the black card heavy in her hand. Emma leaned against her, burning up with fever. The pharmacist had already given her a suspicious look when she'd approached the counter. People like Sarah, people who looked homeless because they were homeless, didn't usually carry American Express Centurion cards. This will be $37, the pharmacist said, scanning the children's fever medication and antibiotics. Sarah handed over the card, half expecting it to be declined, for security to be called, for this whole thing to be some cruel joke. But the transaction went through. The pharmacist's eyebrows rose slightly, but she said nothing, just bagged the medication and handed it back with the card. Thank you, Sarah whispered. Outside, she found a bench in a small park and gave Emma the first dose of medicine. The little girl's eyes were glassy, her breathing shallow. Sarah held her close, feeling the heat radiating from her small body, and fought back tears. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. 6 months ago, they'd had an apartment. Sarah had worked as a dental hygienist, Emma was in first grade, and life, while not perfect, had been stable. Then Sarah's ex-boyfriend, Emma's father, had shown up after 2 years of absence. He'd been charming at first, apologetic, wanting to be part of their lives again. Sarah had been cautious, but hopeful. Emma deserved a father. But within weeks, his true nature had revealed itself. The drinking. The anger. The violence. The night Sarah had finally called the police, James had destroyed their apartment in a rage. He'd been arrested, but the damage was done. Sarah had lost her security deposit, couldn't afford the repairs, and was evicted. Her job had let her go after she'd missed too many days dealing with court appearances and trying to find shelter. The descent into homelessness had been shockingly fast. Now, sitting on this bench with her sick daughter and a billionaire's credit card in her pocket, Sarah felt the weight of impossible choices. She looked at the card again, turning it over in her fingers. Marcus Chin. She'd heard that name before. Tech billionaire. One of the richest men in Seattle. And he'd just handed her unlimited access to his money for 24 hours. To test her. To see if she'd prove his cynical theory about human nature. Sarah's first instinct was to throw the card away, to refuse to be his experiment. But Emma coughed again, and Sarah felt her resolve weaken. Pride was a luxury she couldn't afford anymore. If this man wanted to judge her, let him judge. She'd make the choices she needed to make, and she'd face him tomorrow with her head held high. She pulled out the battered smartphone she'd managed to keep charged at public libraries. It was past noon. 23 hours left. She opened the Notes app and began to make a list. Emma needed more than just fever medication. She needed warm clothes, proper shoes. The sneakers she wore had holes in them, and Sarah had been stuffing them with newspaper to keep her daughter's feet dry. They needed food. Real food, not just what they could get from the shelter or the scraps Sarah could afford from dollar stores. They needed dignity. But Sarah's list didn't start with any of those things. She picked up Emma, who wrapped her thin arms around her mother's neck, and headed toward the bus stop. She knew exactly where she needed to go first. Marcus sat in his board meeting, only half listening to the CFO's presentation about quarterly earnings. His phone was on the table in front of him, notifications silenced but visible. He'd been checking it every few minutes. The first transaction had come through at 12:47 p.m. Walgreens Pharmacy. $37. Expected. Necessary. Nothing revealing about that. But then nothing. For 2 hours, no other charges appeared. Marcus found himself wondering what Sarah was doing. Had she chickened out? Was she planning something? The anticipation gnawed at him in a way he hadn't experienced in years. His life had become so predictable, so controlled. This chaos, this uncertainty, felt almost exciting. At 3:15 p.m., his phone buzzed. A new transaction. Target. $423. Marcus's jaw tightened. Here it was. The beginning of the spending spree. He imagined Sarah loading up a cart with electronics, designer clothes, luxury items she'd never been able to afford. $400 at Target could buy a lot of indulgence. Around the conference table, his executives continued their presentations, but Marcus was somewhere else entirely. He was thinking about the look in Sarah's eyes when she'd taken the card. The wariness. The desperation. The pride fighting against need. Marcus? Your thoughts on the proposed expansion? He looked up to find everyone staring at him. Sorry. Continue. I'll review the details later and send my notes. His COO frowned but moved on. Marcus Chin never zoned out during meetings. Never let anything distract him from business. But today, he couldn't focus on profit margins and market projections. He was too busy wondering what a homeless woman was buying at Target and whether she was about to confirm everything he'd always believed about people. Sarah pushed the shopping cart through Target with Emma sitting in the child's seat, her fever already starting to break thanks to the medication. The store was warm, brightly lit, overwhelming after weeks of shelters and streets. Emma's eyes widened at the displays, the colors, the abundance. Can we get a toy, Mama? She asked, her voice hoarse but hopeful. Sarah's heart clenched. Maybe later, baby. We have important shopping to do first. She went to the children's section and began picking out clothes for Emma. Warm pajamas. Socks. Underwear. 2 pairs of jeans. 3 long-sleeve shirts. A winter coat that was on clearance. Shoes. Real shoes with rubber soles and no holes. She found herself checking price tags out of habit, then stopping. She had no limit. Not today. But Sarah couldn't bring herself to be wasteful. She chose practical items, things Emma needed, things that would last. She added a sturdy backpack, the kind with padded straps that wouldn't hurt small shoulders. Toiletries. A hairbrush. Hair ties. The basics of childhood that Emma had been going without. At the grocery section, Sarah filled the cart with food. Not just crackers and peanut butter, but fruits and vegetables, bread, cheese, milk, chicken, rice. She added vitamins. Protein bars. Things that would keep, that she could carry, that would nourish her daughter properly. The cashier rang up each item with the blank efficiency of someone who'd seen it all. The total appeared on the screen. $423.67. Sarah handed over the black card, still half expecting it to be declined. But it went through smoothly. She loaded the bags into the cart, her mind already moving to the next stop. Mama, where are we going? Emma asked as they left the store. To help someone else, sweetheart. The shelter where Sarah and Emma had been staying was a 15-minute bus ride away. It was a small facility run by a local church, always overcrowded, always underfunded. The director, Margaret, was a tired woman in her 60s who did more with less than anyone Sarah had ever met. Sarah found her in the office, buried under paperwork and donation requests. "Sarah, honey, is Emma all right? I was worried when you didn't come back last night." "She's better." "Margaret, I need to ask you something. What does the shelter need most right now?" Margaret laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Everything. We need everything." "Why do you ask?" Sarah pulled out the credit card. "I have access to some money. Just for today. I want to help." Margaret's eyes widened as Sarah explained the situation. "That's insane. That's wonderful. That's terrifying. Sarah, are you sure about this?" "I'm sure that there are people here who need help more than I do. Tell me what to buy." Margaret didn't hesitate. She pulled up a list on her computer, a wish list she'd been maintaining for months. "We need bedding. Blankets, sheets, pillows. We're going into winter and half the beds don't have proper covers. We need hygiene supplies. Toothbrushes, toothpaste, soap, shampoo. We need diapers for the families with babies. We need first aid supplies. We need—" She stopped, overwhelmed. "Make me a list," Sarah said. "I'll get as much as I can." For the next 3 hours, Sarah became a woman on a mission. She went to Costco and loaded a cart with bulk items. Industrial-sized packs of toilet paper, paper towels, trash bags. Cases of soap and shampoo. Hundreds of toothbrushes and tubes of toothpaste. The total was over $800. She didn't flinch. At a bedding store, she bought blankets. Warm, thick fleece blankets in bulk. Pillows. Sheet sets. The manager gave her a discount when she explained they were for a homeless shelter, and Sarah felt a rush of gratitude for this stranger's kindness. Another $1,000. She went to a medical supply store and bought first aid kits, over-the-counter medications, bandages, antiseptic. $300. At a grocery store, she bought non-perishable food items. Canned goods, pasta, rice, beans, coffee, tea. Items that could feed dozens of people over weeks. $600. By the time she returned to the shelter with everything loaded in a taxi she'd splurged on, it was almost 7 p.m. Margaret wept when she saw what Sarah had brought. Together, with help from other residents, they unloaded everything, stacking supplies in the shelter's small storage room. "Sarah, this is going to help so many people," Margaret said, hugging her tightly. "You didn't have to do this." "Yes, I did," Sarah replied simply. Emma had fallen asleep on one of the shelter's couches, wrapped in one of the new blankets. Sarah watched her daughter sleep, her face finally peaceful, and felt the enormity of what she was doing settle over her. She'd spent thousands of dollars of a stranger's money. Money she'd never be able to repay. And she had 14 hours left. She looked at the credit card in her hand. Marcus Chin wanted to see what she'd do with unlimited resources. He expected greed. He expected selfishness. He probably expected her to max out the card on luxury items to prove his cynical worldview. But Sarah had learned something in the months since she'd lost everything. When you have nothing, you understand what really matters. And it isn't stuff. It isn't luxury. It's dignity. It's warmth. It's the ability to help others who are suffering alongside you. She pulled out her phone and continued down the list she'd made earlier. There were more people to help. More needs to meet. And the clock was ticking. Marcus couldn't sleep. It was past midnight, and his phone kept buzzing with notifications. He'd watched the charges accumulate throughout the evening with growing confusion. Target. $423. That one made sense. Probably clothes and food. But then, Costco. $837. A bedding store. $1,042. A medical supply store. $318. A grocery store. $694. What was she doing? These weren't the purchases of someone splurging on themselves. These were bulk purchases. Practical purchases. The kind of shopping someone would do if they were stocking a shelter or preparing for a disaster. Marcus pulled up his laptop and began tracking the addresses where the card had been used. He cross-referenced them with the map, creating a pattern. She'd stayed in the same general area, focused on stores that sold basics, necessities, supplies. A new charge came through. 11:47 p.m. An all-night pharmacy. $212. Marcus grabbed his coat. He found the pharmacy easily, a 24-hour Walgreens in a part of town he rarely visited. Through the window, he could see Sarah at the counter, Emma asleep in her arms. The pharmacist was ringing up items, and Sarah was pointing to things behind the counter, prescription medications that required consultation. Marcus watched from his car as Sarah completed the transaction, then left with several bags. She walked to a bus stop and sat down, adjusting Emma so the little girl stayed comfortable. Even from a distance, Marcus could see the exhaustion on Sarah's face, the deep weariness that came from carrying too much for too long. He started his car, intending to drive away, to maintain the distance this experiment required. But instead, he found himself pulling up to the bus stop. Sarah looked up as the luxury sedan stopped in front of her. Her eyes widened when Marcus rolled down the window. "It's late," he said. "Let me drive you wherever you're going." "I'm fine. The bus will be here soon." "Sarah, it's 1 a.m. You have a sick child. Get in the car." For a moment, she hesitated. Then Emma stirred, coughed, and Sarah's resolve crumbled. She stood and opened the back door, settling Emma on the seat before climbing in herself. "Where to?" Marcus asked. "The shelter on 5th and Pine." They drove in silence for several minutes. Marcus kept glancing in the rearview mirror, watching Sarah hold her sleeping daughter. Finally, he spoke. "I've been tracking the purchases." "I know. That was the deal." "What are you doing, Sarah? What's all this for?" Sarah met his eyes in the mirror. "What do you think I'm doing?" "I don't know. That's why I'm asking. You gave me this test to prove that people are selfish. That given unlimited money, we'd waste it on ourselves. But you're wrong about something, Mr. Chen. When you have nothing, you learn what actually matters. And what matters isn't having more stuff. It's making sure the people around you survive another day." Marcus pulled up to the shelter and put the car in park. He turned to look at her directly. "You've spent thousands of dollars today. On other people. Not just other people. On my community. On the people who share this nightmare with me." Sarah's voice was steady, but there was an edge to it. "You wanted to see what I do with your money? I'm doing exactly what someone should do when they have more than they need. I'm sharing it." She opened the door and carefully lifted Emma out. Before closing it, she looked back at Marcus. "I have 12 hours left. I'm not done yet." Then she was gone, disappearing into the shelter with her daughter and her purchases, leaving Marcus sitting alone in his car, his certainty shaken in ways he hadn't anticipated. Drop a comment below and let me know what you think Sarah should buy next. And if this story is keeping you hooked, smash that like button. We're just getting started, and trust me, what happens in the next 12 hours will absolutely change everything. Marcus didn't go home. He sat in his car outside the shelter for 20 minutes, staring at the worn brick building with its flickering entrance light. Everything he thought he knew was being challenged by a homeless woman who'd spent his money more wisely than most of his business partners spent their own. He finally drove to his penthouse, but sleep wouldn't come. He lay in his king-size bed, surrounded by luxury that suddenly felt hollow, watching transaction notifications appear on his phone like accusations. At 6:47 a.m., a new charge appeared. Starbucks. $83. Marcus sat up. $83 at Starbucks? That was roughly 20 drinks. His first thought was that she was buying coffee for other shelter residents, but something nagged at him. He got dressed and headed out, using the card's GPS data to find the exact location. The Starbucks was in a business district, already bustling with morning commuters. Marcus walked in and immediately spotted what Sarah had done. At a table near the window sat 3 people in worn clothes, hunched over tall cups of coffee and breakfast sandwiches. They had the weathered look of people who lived outside, and they were eating slowly, savoring every bite. The barista noticed Marcus watching. "You know those folks?" "Not exactly." "Did a woman with a little girl buy those meals?" The barista smiled. "She did. Came in about an hour ago." Said she wanted to buy breakfast for anyone who came in who looked like they needed it. Prepaid for 20 meals. Said to give them the good stuff, not just coffee. Sandwiches, pastries, whatever they wanted. She paused. She also left a $50 tip and told me to keep treating people with kindness. Made my whole week, honestly. Marcus felt something crack in his chest. Sarah hadn't just bought meals. She'd bought dignity. She'd created a moment where homeless people could walk into a place that usually made them feel unwelcome and be treated like valued customers. He left before anyone could recognize him, his mind reeling. Back in his car, he pulled up the full transaction history. He needed to understand the pattern, the logic behind her choices. 7:42 a.m. A laundromat. $153. She'd probably bought loads of quarters and detergent for shelter residents to wash their clothes. 8:15 a.m. A phone store. $228. That one puzzled him until he researched it. Prepaid phones. Lifelines for homeless people who needed to call potential employers, check on social services, stay connected to caseworkers. 8:53 a.m. A thrift store. $97. More clothes, probably. Professional attire for people going to job interviews. Each purchase was small, strategic, thoughtful. Sarah wasn't trying to solve homelessness with his money. She was trying to make the daily indignities of it more bearable for as many people as possible. Marcus pulled out his own phone and made a call. "Jennifer, I need you to clear my schedule for today." His assistant's voice was shocked. "All of it? You have the merger meeting at 10 and clear it. Something's come up." He spent the morning following Sarah's trail. Not directly, but close enough. He watched her from a distance as she went to a department store and bought a dozen pairs of work boots in various sizes, then delivered them to a day labor center where homeless men lined up hoping for construction work. He saw her at a dollar store, filling a cart with school supplies, notebooks, pencils, crayons, which she then took to an after-school program that served homeless children. At each stop, Sarah was methodical. She talked to the people running these organizations, asked what they needed most, and bought it. She didn't grandstand or draw attention to herself. She just quietly filled gaps that government services and charity donations never quite reached. Emma stayed close to her mother through it all, no longer feverish but still tired. Marcus noticed how Sarah always made sure her daughter ate first, rested when needed, was comfortable before moving on to the next task. Even in the middle of this unprecedented spending spree, Sarah's priority was clearly her child's well-being. By noon, Sarah had spent over $8,000. Marcus found himself checking the account balance not with anger but with something approaching awe. She had access to millions, and she was spending thousands. Carefully. Purposefully. With more financial wisdom than people who'd never missed a meal in their lives. Sarah sat on a bench in Pioneer Square, watching Emma play on the playground. Her daughter's laughter was the most beautiful sound in the world, made even sweeter by the fact that just yesterday, Emma had been too sick to smile. The new coat kept her warm, the new shoes let her run without pain, and for a few precious moments, she was just a normal kid playing. Sarah looked at the credit card in her hand. She'd been awake for over 30 hours now, running on adrenaline and purpose. The list on her phone had more items checked off than not, but there were still things she wanted to do. Needed to do. The clock was ticking down. 11 hours left. A woman sat down on the bench next to her. She was older, maybe 70, with gray hair pulled back in a neat bun. She wore a volunteer badge from the downtown mission. "Your daughter's beautiful," the woman said. "Thank you. I'm Dorothy. I've been volunteering at missions and shelters for 40 years. I saw you this morning at St. James. Margaret told me what you're doing." Sarah tensed, defensive. "I'm not doing anything wrong. Honey, I didn't say you were. I said Margaret told me what you're doing, and I wanted to thank you. Do you know how rare it is to see someone with resources use them the way you are?" Sarah relaxed slightly. "It's not really my money. I'm just borrowing it." "That's exactly my point. Most people, if they got their hands on a credit card with no limit, would buy themselves a new life. But you're using it to improve the lives of people who have even less than you do. That's remarkable." "It's just what you do," Sarah said quietly. When you've been at the bottom, you know what people need. And it's not usually what people think. Dorothy nodded. I've been wanting to start a program. A small fund to help homeless families with the specific things that keep them from getting back on their feet. You know, the birth certificate they need to apply for a job but costs $75 they don't have. The work clothes for an interview. The deposit for a phone so employers can call them back. The little things that are actually big things. Sarah turned to look at her. That's a good idea. Why haven't you started it? Funding. It's always funding. Churches and charities want to fund big, visible projects. But this would be small, individualized help. It doesn't make for good publicity photos. Sarah was quiet for a moment, then pulled out her phone. How much would you need to start? To help, say, 50 families. Dorothy calculated in her head. Maybe 15,000? That would be $300 per family for emergency assistance. Birth certificates, IDs, work boots, phone deposits, interview clothes, emergency prescriptions, things like that. Sarah nodded and stood up. Emma, honey, come here. We have one more stop to make. Dorothy's eyes widened. Wait, I wasn't asking for. I know you weren't. But I'm offering anyway. Let's go set up your fund. They went to a community bank where Dorothy had an account. Sarah worked with the bank manager to set up a dedicated fund, transferring $15,000 into it with Dorothy as the administrator. The paperwork took 2 hours, and Sarah insisted on establishing clear guidelines. The money was only for emergency assistance that prevented families from moving forward. It had to be things people couldn't get through existing services. And Dorothy had full discretion to distribute it as she saw fit. This is going to change lives, Dorothy said, tears in her eyes as they finished. Real, concrete lives. Do you understand that? Sarah thought about the birth certificate she hadn't been able to afford when she'd needed to apply for a job. The way that $75 had been the difference between employment and continued homelessness. I understand, she said simply. As they left the bank, Emma tugged on her mother's sleeve. Mama, I'm hungry. Sarah checked her phone. 3:47 p.m. 8 hours left. Okay, baby. Let's get food. They went to a family restaurant, nothing fancy, and Sarah let Emma order whatever she wanted. A cheeseburger with fries. Chocolate milk. Apple pie for dessert. The simple joy on her daughter's face was worth more than any purchase Sarah had made all day. Marcus watched from a booth across the restaurant. He'd been following them since the bank, and he'd heard everything. The fund Dorothy had described was exactly the kind of practical, unglamorous solution that most philanthropists overlooked. It wouldn't get anyone's name on a building or generate good press, but it would actually help people in concrete, measurable ways. He watched Sarah cut Emma's burger into smaller pieces, watched her make sure her daughter ate vegetables along with the fries, watched her gently wipe chocolate milk from Emma's chin. She was exhausted. He could see it in the slump of her shoulders, the dark circles under her eyes. But she was still going, still pushing, still trying to do as much good as possible with the time she had left. Marcus's phone buzzed with a call from his COO. He declined it. Then declined the next one. And the next. For the first time in his professional life, Marcus Chin was choosing to ignore his business obligations in favor of something else. Someone else. He wanted to understand Sarah Mitchell. Not as an experiment, not as a test subject, but as a person. What had shaped her into someone who, given everything, chose to give it away? After Emma finished eating, Sarah paid the bill and they left. Marcus followed at a distance, watching as they walked several blocks to a part of the city he rarely visited. The buildings here were older, more worn. Graffiti covered some walls, and the people on the streets moved with the wary exhaustion of those for whom life was a daily struggle. Sarah stopped in front of a small storefront. The sign read Rose's Alterations. She went inside with Emma. Marcus waited a few minutes, then followed. Through the window, he could see Sarah talking animatedly with an elderly Hispanic woman. Emma sat in a chair, swinging her legs, while the two women gestured and talked. Money was exchanged. The elderly woman tried to refuse it, but Sarah insisted, pressing cash into her hands. When Sarah emerged, her eyes were red. Emma looked up at her with concern. Why are you crying, Mama? Happy tears, baby. Those are happy tears. Marcus approached them. He'd given up pretending he wasn't following her. What was that about? Sarah wasn't surprised to see him. You've been tracking me all day. I have. What did you just do in there? Sarah wiped her eyes. Rosa is an immigrant. She's been running that alteration shop for 30 years. She altered my wedding dress when I got married. Fixed Emma's baby clothes when she was born. She's always been kind to me, even when I couldn't pay right away. Sarah took a breath. Last month, her landlord tripled her rent. She was going to lose the shop. I just paid her rent for the next year. How much? $18,000. Marcus did the calculation in his head. Sarah had now spent over $40,000 of his money. And she still had 7 hours left. You could have bought yourself an apartment for that money. A car. Started over completely. Rosa needs that shop. She supports her grandchildren with it. 3 families depend on her income. My need doesn't erase hers. You're homeless, Sarah. You're literally homeless, and you're paying someone else's rent. Yes, Sarah said simply. Because I know what it's like to lose everything. I wouldn't wish that on anyone, especially not someone who's spent their life helping others. Marcus stared at her, this woman who was systematically destroying every assumption he'd built his worldview on. You're not what I expected. I know. I'm not here to meet your expectations, Mr. Chen. I'm here to do what's right with the opportunity you gave me, even if you gave it for the wrong reasons. Emma yawned, leaning against her mother. Sarah picked her up, and the little girl immediately nestled into her shoulder. I need to get her back to the shelter, Sarah said. She needs rest. Let me drive you. Why? So you can observe your experiment more closely? The bitterness in her voice stung, but Marcus deserved it. No, because I'm starting to realize this isn't an experiment anymore. And I want to understand. Sarah studied his face for a long moment. Then she nodded and let him lead them to his car. They drove in silence for a while. Emma fell asleep almost immediately, exhausted from the long day. Marcus kept glancing at Sarah in the rearview mirror. She was looking out the window, watching the city pass by. Tell me something, Marcus said finally. Why did you take the card in the first place? You could have refused. You could have told me to keep my test and my judgment. Sarah was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Then she spoke, her voice soft. Because Emma needed medicine. Because I was desperate. Because even though I knew you were judging me, I thought maybe, just maybe, I could use your money to do something good. Something that mattered. She met his eyes in the mirror. I took your card because sometimes you have to swallow your pride to survive. But I used it the way I did because pride and dignity aren't the same thing. Marcus pulled up to the shelter, but neither of them moved to get out. I was wrong about you, Marcus admitted. I thought giving someone unlimited money would reveal their worst impulses. I thought it would prove that people are fundamentally selfish. And now? Now I think I'm the selfish one. I've had unlimited resources my entire adult life, and what have I done with them? Built wealth. Accumulated power. Proved I was smarter than everyone else. He paused. You've had my card for 16 hours, and you've done more good than I've done in years. Sarah opened the door and carefully lifted Emma out. Before closing it, she looked back at Marcus. You have 8 hours to think about that, Mr. Chen. Because tomorrow at noon, I'm giving you back your card, and you're going to have to decide what you do with all that power and all that money. I showed you what I do with it. Now you need to figure out what you're going to do with yours. She walked into the shelter, leaving Marcus sitting in his car, watching the taillights of passing vehicles blur as tears he hadn't cried in 20 years finally fell. If you're still watching, I need you to do something for me. Hit that subscribe button right now, because what happens in the final 8 hours is going to completely shatter you. And leave a comment telling me what you would do with unlimited money for 24 hours. Would you be like Sarah, or would you be honest and admit you'd spend it differently? Drop your answer below. This story isn't over yet, and the ending will leave you speechless. Sarah barely slept that night. She lay on her cot in the shelter, Emma curled beside her, and stared at the ceiling. The credit card was in her pocket, and she could feel its weight like a physical presence. 7 hours left. 7 hours to make choices that would define how Marcus Chen saw her, how she saw herself, and possibly how dozens of other people would live in the coming months. At 4:30 a.m., she gave up on sleep. She carefully extracted herself from the bed without waking Emma, kissed her daughter's forehead, and asked Margaret to watch her for a few hours. Then she went out into the dark Seattle morning with a plan. The emergency room at Harborview Medical Center was busy even at this hour. Sarah approached the billing department window and waited patiently for the clerk to acknowledge her. "I need to pay off some medical bills," Sarah said when her turn came. The clerk looked up, taking in Sarah's worn clothes with barely concealed skepticism. "Your own bills?" "No. I want to pay bills for people who can't afford them." The skepticism deepened. "Ma'am, we can't just let random people access patient billing information. There are privacy laws." Sarah pulled out the black card and set it on the counter. The clerk's eyes widened slightly. "I don't need to know names. I don't need to know details. I just want to know how much it would cost to pay off the bills of patients who are in collections, who can't afford their emergency care. Can you tell me that?" The clerk hesitated, then called a supervisor. 20 minutes later, Sarah sat in an office with a hospital financial counselor named Patricia, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. "We have approximately 273 patients currently in collections for emergency care they received here," Patricia explained. "The total amount owed is just over $200,000. But ma'am, I have to ask, why would you want to?" "Because I've been in an emergency room with my daughter, terrified she was dying, and then got a bill for $8,000 that I couldn't pay," Sarah interrupted quietly. "Because medical debt destroys lives. Because people avoid getting help they desperately need because they're afraid of the bill. Because this is something I can fix right now for people I'll never meet." Patricia studied her for a long moment. "You're serious. Completely serious. How do we do this?" It took 3 hours to process. The hospital's legal department had to be consulted. Forms had to be signed. The credit card had to be verified multiple times. But at 7:43 a.m., the transaction went through. $206,437. 273 people who would wake up to find their medical debt had been paid in full by an anonymous donor. Sarah walked out of the hospital as the sun was rising, feeling lighter than she had in months. She checked her phone. 4 hours left. Marcus's phone nearly vibrated off his nightstand. He grabbed it, still half asleep, and stared at the notification. His heart stopped. $206,000. One transaction. Hospital. He sat bolt upright, his mind racing. That was more than all her other purchases combined. That was a life-changing amount of money. Had she finally snapped? Had she bought herself surgery, some kind of luxury medical treatment? He called the hospital, using his connections to get through to the financial office. When Patricia explained what Sarah had actually done, Marcus had to sit down. She paid off other people's medical bills? People she doesn't even know. 273 patients, Mr. Chin. She said she wanted to help people who were avoiding medical care because they couldn't afford it. After he hung up, Marcus sat in his penthouse office, watching the sunrise over Seattle, and felt something fundamental shift inside him. Sarah Mitchell, a homeless woman who had nothing, who was living in a shelter with her sick daughter, had just spent over $250,000 to help strangers. He thought about his own wealth. The millions he'd accumulated, invested, protected. He donated to charity, of course. Tax-deductible contributions to organizations with good ratings. But when was the last time he'd done something that actually cost him something? When had he ever prioritized someone else's need over his own comfort? Sarah wasn't just passing his test. She was revealing how badly he'd failed his own. He got dressed and went to find her. Sarah stood outside a run-down apartment building in the Central District. She'd been here once before, 6 months ago, when her life was different. She pressed the buzzer for apartment 3C and waited. "Who is it?" A tired voice crackled through the intercom. "Mrs. Morrison? It's Sarah Mitchell. I used to work with your daughter at the dental office." A pause. "Sarah? Oh, honey, come up, come up." The apartment was small, but immaculately clean. Mrs. Morrison was in her 70s, moving slowly with a walker. Her daughter, Janet, had been Sarah's closest friend at work. They'd lost touch after Sarah became homeless, not because Janet didn't care, but because Sarah had been too ashamed to reach out. Janet told me what happened to you, Mrs. Morrison said, ushering Sarah to the couch. She's been so worried. She tried to find you, but I know. I made it hard to be found. Sarah took a breath. Mrs. Morrison, I came because I know Janet's been trying to take care of you while working 2 jobs. And I know you need home care help, but it's expensive. The older woman's face fell. Janet worries too much. I'm fine. You're not fine. You need someone to help you with daily activities, medication management, physical therapy. Janet told me months ago that she couldn't afford to hire anyone. Sarah pulled out a piece of paper. I found a home care service. They can provide 20 hours a week of in-home care. I've paid for the next 6 months. Mrs. Morrison's hands trembled as she took the paper. Sarah, that must cost thousands. How can you possibly afford? I can't. But today I can. Today I have the means to help people I care about, and you're at the top of that list. The older woman wept, and Sarah held her, feeling the weight of gratitude and grief mixed together. This was what money could do. Not by happiness, but by relief. By time. By dignity for someone who'd spent their life caring for others. The home care service had cost $18,000 for 6 months. Sarah had 3 hours left and still had items on her list. She found Marcus waiting outside the building when she left. He was leaning against his car, and he straightened when he saw her. How did you know I was here? She asked. I've been tracking the card, remember? And I made some calls. I know what you did at the hospital, Sarah. She met his gaze steadily. And? Are you going to tell me I should have spent it on myself? That I was foolish to waste your money on strangers? No. Marcus's voice was rough. I'm going to tell you that you're a better person than I am. And I'm going to ask you why. Why what? Why you're doing this? All of it. You could have kept some for yourself. You could have set yourself up, made sure Emma had everything she needed for months. Instead, you're giving it all away to other people. Why? Sarah was quiet for a moment, gathering her thoughts. 6 months ago, when Emma and I first became homeless, I thought it was the end of the world. I thought we were alone, that no one cared, that we'd been forgotten by society. But then I met people. People in the shelters, on the streets, at the food banks. And you know what I learned? Marcus shook his head. I learned that there's a whole community of people who have nothing, but they share what little they have. The woman who gave Emma her last granola bar because my daughter was crying from hunger. The man who gave up his spot in the shelter so a pregnant woman wouldn't have to sleep outside. The teenagers who pooled their change to buy diapers for a baby. These people, the ones society has forgotten, they're the most generous people I've ever met. Sarah's voice grew stronger. You gave me this test because you thought it would prove that poor people are greedy, that given the chance, we'd be just as selfish as anyone else. But you were asking the wrong question. It's not about what poor people would do with money. It's about what people with money should be doing with it. And the answer is what the poorest people already know. You share it. You help each other. You lift others up because you know what it's like to be down. Marcus felt tears on his face and didn't bother to wipe them away. I've been so wrong about everything. Yes, you have. But you can change. That's what I'm trying to show you. Money isn't the problem, and poverty isn't a moral failing. The problem is how we choose to use what we have and how we treat people who have less. Sarah checked her phone. I have 2 hours left. I'm not done yet. Where are you going next? To keep a promise I made to my daughter. The Children's Museum was opening when Sarah arrived with Emma. Marcus followed, keeping his distance, but unable to stay away. He watched as Sarah bought a year-long family membership, then took Emma inside. For the next hour, Marcus watched through the windows as Sarah and Emma explored exhibits together. Emma's face was radiant with joy as she played with water tables, built structures with giant blocks, and painted at the art station. Sarah laughed, really laughed, for the first time Marcus had seen. She chased Emma through a maze, helped her dress up in costumes, and took pictures with a disposable camera she'd bought in the gift shop. It was such a simple thing. A mother and daughter spending time together, playing, being normal. But Marcus understood the significance. Sarah hadn't just been helping others all day. She'd been creating moments of normalcy and joy for her daughter, moments that homelessness had stolen from them. When they emerged, Emma was clutching a small stuffed animal from the gift shop and talking excitedly about everything she'd seen. Sarah looked exhausted but genuinely happy. Marcus approached them. "Emma, it's nice to meet you properly." "I'm Marcus." Emma looked up at him with curious eyes. "You're the man who gave Mama your special card." "That's right. Mama used it to help lots of people. She's really good at helping people." Marcus crouched down to Emma's level. "She is. Your mom is one of the most amazing people I've ever met." Emma nodded seriously. "I know. She's the best mama in the whole world." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. She checked her phone one last time. 11:47 a.m. 13 minutes left. "There's one more thing I need to do," she said. They walked to a small jewelry store a few blocks away. Sarah went to the counter and spoke with the jeweler, a middle-aged man with kind eyes. She pointed to items in the display case, and he pulled them out for her to examine. Marcus watched as Sarah selected two simple gold necklaces with small pendants. One had an S and one had an E. She paid for them, had them wrapped, and then did something unexpected. She put one necklace on Emma and kept the other in its box. "This is so we can always be connected," Sarah told her daughter. "See? Your initial and my initial. We're a team, you and me. Always." Emma touched the pendant with reverence. "Always, Mama." They walked to Pioneer Square, to the same spot where Marcus had first handed Sarah his card. It was 11:58 a.m. 2 minutes left. Sarah pulled out the credit card and looked at it one last time. Then she handed it back to Marcus. "Thank you," she said simply. Marcus took the card with shaking hands. He pulled out his phone and checked the final total. Sarah had spent $274,612 in 24 hours. "You had access to millions," Marcus said. "You spent less than $300,000. Do you know what that tells me? That I'm terrible at being greedy? That you knew exactly how much good you could do with that amount and you did it. You were strategic. Thoughtful. You maximized impact while minimizing waste. You spent my money better than I've ever spent my own." Sarah shrugged. "I spent it the only way that made sense. On things that mattered to people who needed help." Marcus looked at Emma, then back at Sarah. He made a decision that would change everything. "I want to offer you something. Not charity. A partnership." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "What kind of partnership?" "I want to start a foundation. One that does exactly what you did today. Helps people in practical, unglamorous ways that actually make a difference. Birth certificates and work boots and medical bills and rent payments and all the small things that keep people trapped. I want you to run it." "I'm homeless, Mr. Chin. I don't have credentials or experience running a foundation. You have something better. You have wisdom. You know what people actually need because you've lived it. You understand how to make money matter because you've lived without it." Marcus pulled out his phone. "I'm putting $50 million into this foundation. You'll have a salary, health insurance, housing. But more importantly, you'll have the resources to do what you did today on a massive scale. Not just in Seattle, but everywhere." Sarah stared at him. "Why would you do this?" "Because you were right. I had everything and I did nothing. You had nothing and you did everything. I want to learn from you. I want to be better. And I think together, we can actually change lives." Emma tugged on her mother's hand. "Mama, does this mean we get our own house?" Sarah looked down at her daughter, then back at Marcus. Tears streamed down her face. "I don't know what to say. Say yes. Say you'll help me be the kind of person who deserves what he has. Say you'll show me how to use money the way you did today, every day, for the rest of my life." For a long moment, Sarah was silent. Then she nodded. "Yes, but on one condition." "Anything." "The first thing we do is create that emergency fund Dorothy talked about. And the second thing we do is hire Margaret from the shelter to help run programs. And the third thing is we set up a system where people in need aren't just given handouts, but given the tools and support to rebuild their lives with dignity." Marcus smiled, really smiled, for the first time in years. "Deal." 6 months later, Marcus stood in a conference room that had been transformed into an operations center. On the walls were maps showing programs across 5 states. Charts tracked families helped, bills paid, lives changed. Sarah sat at the head of the table, leading a meeting with program directors from different cities. The key is individualized help, Sarah was saying. We're not trying to solve systemic poverty with this foundation, that's for policymakers. We're trying to help individual families overcome specific barriers. Mrs. Rodriguez in Phoenix needs a transmission for her car so she can get to her new job. We fixed that. The Johnson family in Denver needs first and last month's rent for an apartment. We provide that. It's not glamorous, but it works. Marcus watched her with pride. Sarah had transformed from a homeless single mother into a confident, effective leader. But she never lost the wisdom that came from her experience. Every decision she made was informed by what she'd lived through, and it showed in the results. The foundation had helped over 2,000 families in 6 months. The success rate was staggering. 92% of families who received assistance were stable a year later, compared to less than 30% who went through traditional programs. After the meeting, Sarah found Marcus in his office. She was wearing professional clothes now, her hair styled, looking healthy and rested. But her eyes still carried the knowledge of what she'd survived. Emma got accepted into the gifted program at school, Sarah said, smiling. That's wonderful. You must be so proud. I am. She's thriving. We both are. Sarah sat down across from him. I wanted to thank you again for believing in me. I should be thanking you. You changed my life, Sarah. You showed me what really matters. We changed each other's lives. That day you handed me your card, you thought you were testing me. But really, we were both being tested. And somehow we both passed. Marcus nodded. What you did with that money in 24 hours, it broke something open in me. I realized I'd been living a life of accumulation without purpose. You showed me that having everything means nothing if you're not doing something with it. Sarah stood to leave, then paused. By the way, I kept one receipt from that day. The necklaces I bought for Emma and me. Do you want to know why? Why? Because that was the only purchase I made entirely for myself. Just because it made me happy. Just because I wanted something beautiful to connect me to my daughter. She smiled. I needed to remember that it's okay to have things that bring you joy, as long as you never forget the responsibility that comes with having enough. After she left, Marcus pulled up his laptop and looked at his personal finances. He'd made more money in the 6 months since starting the foundation than he'd spent on it. His wealth had actually grown while he was giving it away. But the numbers didn't matter anymore. What mattered were the letters he received from families the foundation had helped. The photos of children in warm coats. The thank you notes from people who'd been given a second chance. What mattered was that he'd learned the lesson Sarah had tried to teach him. Money doesn't reveal character. It reveals choices. And every day, we choose what kind of person we want to be. Marcus opened his email and started typing. Dear Foundation Board members, I am writing to propose we increase our annual budget to $200 million. 3 years after that day in Pioneer Square, Emma, now 9 years old, stood at a podium in a community center. She'd been asked to speak at the foundation's anniversary celebration. Sarah sat in the front row, watching her daughter with pride. My mom always tells me that the worst day of her life led to the best decision of her life, Emma said, her voice clear and confident. When we were homeless, she learned something important. She learned that people are good, even when life is bad. She learned that the people with the least often give the most. And she learned that if you get a chance to help someone, you take it, even if it's hard. Emma looked at her mother. Mr. Chen gave my mom a credit card for one day. He thought it was a test. But really, it was a gift. Not just for us, but for everyone my mom helped that day, and everyone the foundation has helped since. She held up the necklace she still wore every day, the one with her initial. Sarah touched her own matching necklace. My mom taught me that we're all connected, Emma continued. When one person suffers, we all lose something. When one person is lifted up, we all rise. Mr. Chen's money bought medicine and food and shelter. But my mom's choices bought something even more important, dignity. Hope. Proof that we're not alone. Emma smiled. So thank you, Mr. Chen, for taking a chance. Thank you, Mom, for showing everyone what real strength looks like. And thank you to everyone here who believes that we can make the world better, one person, one family, one act of kindness at a time. The room erupted in applause. Sarah wiped tears from her eyes as Emma came down from the podium and hugged her tightly. Marcus approached them, his own eyes damp. "She's incredible, Sarah. Just like her mother. She's going to change the world," Sarah said. Not because she had everything handed to her, but because she knows what it's like to have nothing and still find reasons to be kind. That evening, after the celebration ended, Marcus stood alone on the balcony of the community center, looking out over the city. His phone buzzed with a notification. Another family helped. Another barrier overcome. Another life changed. He thought about the man he'd been 3 years ago. Cold. Cynical. Certain that he understood human nature. He'd given Sarah his credit card to prove that people were selfish, that poverty was a moral failing, that his success was justified because others would waste what he'd earned. Instead, she'd proven that he was the one who needed to change. That wisdom wasn't found in boardrooms and bank accounts, but in the lived experiences of people who'd survived what he could never imagine. That true wealth wasn't measured in dollars, but in the impact you had on others. Sarah had spent 24 hours showing him what really mattered. And he'd spent the last 3 years trying to live up to the example she'd set. His phone rang. It was his assistant. Marcus, the mayor's office called. They want to discuss expanding the foundation's programs citywide. They're calling it a model for how private philanthropy should work. Marcus smiled. Set up the meeting. And make sure Sarah leads it. This is her vision. I'm just the guy who finally learned to write the checks. As he drove home that night, Marcus passed the Pioneer Square where it had all begun. He could still see Sarah standing there, exhausted and desperate, taking his card with shaking hands. He could still feel the certainty he'd had that she would confirm his worst beliefs about humanity. She'd done the opposite. She'd broken him down and built him back up into someone better. Someone who understood that having everything meant nothing if you weren't willing to share it. Someone who knew that the measure of a person wasn't what they accumulated, but what they gave away. Marcus had given Sarah a credit card for 24 hours. Sarah had given Marcus a reason to be better for the rest of his life. And that, he realized, was the real test. Not what we do when we have nothing, but what we do when we have everything. The choice is ours. Every single day. Every single moment. What will you choose? If this story moved you, if it changed the way you think about wealth and poverty and kindness and humanity, then I need you to do something. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss stories that restore your faith in people. Hit that like button if you believe that one act of kindness can change the world. And drop a comment below telling me what you learned from Sarah's journey. What would you do with unlimited resources? How would you use money to make a difference? Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that good people exist. That generosity isn't about how much you have, but about what you're willing to give. That the worst days of our lives can lead to the best decisions we ever make. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being part of this community. And remember, money doesn't reveal character. Choices do. What will you choose today?